I grew up in the city of Brasov, at the edge of Transylvania, where the rhythmic pulse of modern life mingled with ancient legends whispered by the Carpathian forests. From the earliest days, I, Adrian Novak, felt like the shadow sibling. My younger sister Celeste was 4 years my junior and always hailed as the family's bright star, while I learned to shoulder each challenge alone. My father, Elias, a retired electrical engineer with rigid expectations, believed I needed no coddling, and my mother, Marisol, tended to everyone else but scarcely noticed the boy hidden behind my sense of duty. So when they summoned me one crisp October morning to our modest townhouse and presented me with the keys to the Novak family chalet, a crumbling wooden retreat high above the Valea Oltului Valley, it felt more like a final obligation than a blessing. The binder they handed me contained a faded title deed, a hand-drawn map marked with an obscure symbol, and a brittle leather journal whose first page bore my grandfather's neat looping script. He had vanished in 1972 under circumstances that had become family folklore, never to be explained. That day, with the journal tucked under my arm and a mix of resentment and curiosity churning in my chest, I set out from Brasov toward a legacy I neither sought nor fully understood, unaware that the journey ahead would redefine everything I believed about loyalty, betrayal, and the hidden treasures of both heart and mountain. The journey from Brasov to the remote heights of the Kalimani Ridge unfolded over more than 36 winding kilometers, each bend of the asphalt ribbon unveiling ever-denser groves of spruce and fir, their needles whispering ancient secrets in the mountain air. As daylight waned, a silvery mist cloaked the forest floor, and there, half hidden among mossy boulders, stood the Novak family chalet, its once sturdy timbers bowed under decades of storm and snow. I paused at the threshold, inhaling the cold, damp scent of rot and pine resin, my flashlight's beam trembling across broken roof shingles, shuttered windows askew, and guttering lanterns that swung like silent sentinels in the breeze. Stepping inside, each footfall on the splintered floorboards echoed through the great hall, where a thick layer of dust shrouded a long dining table littered with rusted cutlery. And on the far wall, a portrait of my grandfather, Pavel Novak, gazed, down with solemn, knowing eyes. I set to work clearing away decades of debris, torn upholstery, discarded tools, fragments of yellowed newspapers that crumbled at my touch, until the light caught on a strangely smoother plank near the hearth. Kneeling, I pried it loose with my crowbar, revealing a narrow trap door beneath layers of grime. The rusted iron ring was cold against my palm, as if bracing itself for this moment. Heart pounding like a hammer against bone, I opened the hatch and peered into a shaft of impenetrable darkness. With a deep breath, I descended the creaking wooden stairs, my flashlight slicing through the stale air thick with earth and age. At the bottom, in a low-ceilinged chamber no larger than a modest wine cellar, lay 2 skeletons, their bleached bones stark against the earthen floor. One was clad in a moth-eaten wool coat. The other still wore a battered field cap emblazoned with a faded emblem. Beside them rested a corroded tin box, its latch eaten through by time. With trembling fingers, I lifted the lid to reveal a second leather-bound notebook, its pages brittle but meticulously inscribed, and a folded letter bearing my grandfather's looping script. In that instant, I felt the weight of his last, desperate words, hints of a geological marvel hidden somewhere in these mountains. A betrayal by a trusted colleague, and a warning to trust no one. As I sat there, the stale chill of the cellar seeping through my clothes, I realized this forgotten sanctuary held not just my grandfather's remains, but the key to a legacy that would test every fiber of my being. I spent the remainder of that first evening hunched over my grandfather's second notebook at a rickety pine table in the chalet's main room, the single oil lamp's trembling flame casting long shadows over the brittle pages. The leather cover cracked beneath my fingers as I turned each sheet, revealing meticulous entries in Pavel Novak's firm, looping hand, detailed sketches of a crystalline vein snaking along a dry creek bed 3 kilometers north of the cabin, observations on pale green mica glinting like dewdrops at dawn, and maps annotated with compass bearings from an ancient stone marker carved into the mountainside. Interspersed were personal notes, fragments of a friendship with one Basil Kertész, another geologist whose name appeared in darker, more frantic scrawl toward the notebook's end, along with cryptic warnings not to trust him. My pulse thundered as I realized these were more than idle musings. They were instructions for a precise expedition to a location I'd never heard of, but that now felt intimately familiar. By lamplight, I packed a waterproof satchel with the journal, a folding compass that had belonged to Pavel, a well-worn map of the Kalamani Ridge, and essentials for an overnight trek, a canvas tent, a compact stove, rationed tins of beans and bread, 2 thick sweaters, and a coil of sturdy hemp rope. I also stowed a small hand lens, the better to examine any unusual mineral specimens, and tucked in an old revolver my grandfather once kept for bears, its wood grip worn smooth by years of use. When I finally lay down on the sagging sofa bed, exhaustion tugged at my eyelids, but sleep was a distant promise. Instead, I lay listening to the wind whisper through the broken window panes, imagining Basil's face, friendly at first, then twisted by greed, and wondering what fate had befallen him in this hidden cellar. I drifted in and out of dreams filled with my grandfather's voice urging caution, then jolted awake with the sense of steps creaking above me, only to remember the chalet was mine alone. Before dawn, I rose, my resolve steeled by the notebook's final entry. Seek the mark of the stone wolf, and you will find what I could not protect. With that line echoing in my mind, I shouldered my pack, extinguished the lamp, and stepped into the chill pre-dawn air, the mountains awaiting me like silent judges of a quest begun more than half a century ago. The sky was still a bruise of indigo when I set off along the narrow sheep trail, the satchel's weight a constant reminder of the promise and peril I carried. My breath panted in clouds as I climbed higher, the forest thinning to reveal jagged rock faces veined with quartz that caught the rising sun's first glimmer. Following the compass bearing my grandfather had scrawled beside a tiny wolf emblem, north by northeast for approximately 3 kilometers, I navigated across scree slopes and through stands of black spruce until I reached a small plateau where the air pulsed with silent anticipation. There, half buried in a ledge of weathered sandstone, was the stone wolf, a roughly chiseled carving no more than a foot tall, its angular muzzle lifted toward the sky, eyes closed in eternal watch. My heart hammered as I pressed the brass compass against the carving's base, aligning its needle with the ancient marker. The notebook promised that beyond this sentinel lies the true vein, and I realized I was standing at a crossroads between history and destiny. Retracing my grandfather's footsteps, I turned northeast again, descending into a shallow ravine where a creek bed glittered with mica fragments like scattered diamonds. The earth beneath my boots was damp, yielding to each step until I found the vein. A shimmering ribbon of rock streaked with pale green and flecks of uncut gold that ran along the creek's bedrock as though serum poured by a divine hand. Kneeling, I swept away loose stones, revealing a crystalline seam thick enough to break off sample fragments with my penknife. Each chip reflected sunlight in molten amber flashes, and I realized that here lay not just geological wonder, but the culmination of my grandfather's life's work, and perhaps the motive for his undoing. As I wrapped the samples carefully, a distant echo of snapping twigs stirred the stillness, and I froze, the metallic tang of danger on my tongue. The notebook had warned of Basil Kertész's betrayal, and though decades had passed, the specter of that old alliance and its deadly fracture hung heavy in the alpine air. I packed up with deliberate speed, leaving no trace beyond a handful of crushed mica, and retraced my path toward the stone wolf, resolve hardening like the rock beneath my fingers. I would protect this discovery, but first I had to understand exactly what had happened here all those years ago. I crested the final ridge just as the sun sank behind the Kalamani peaks, casting the chalet's weathered silhouette into sharp relief against the glowing sky. My legs ached from the trek. My satchel weighed heavy with crystalline samples and the torn pages of my grandfather's journal, yet I pressed on, eager to secure the sanctuary I had disturbed at dawn. But as I rounded the corner of the front porch, a knot of dread twisted in my stomach. The heavy oak door hung dangerously ajar, its ancient latch torn from the frame, and the threshold was littered with splinters that glinted like teeth in the failing light. My flashlight revealed more devastation inside. The great hall, once orderly and silent, was now a scene of chaos. Firewood that I had meticulously stacked was strewn across the dusty floor, broken in jagged shards that splintered under my boots. Lantern lay shattered beneath the oak beam, its glass scattered in translucent shards and its lamp oil seeping into the warped boards. And across the back wall, someone had carved a stark warning in ragged letters so deep they caught the flashlights. Beam. Go home. My heart thundered as I traced the crude etchings with shaking fingers, the echo of Basil Curtes's betrayal slithering through time to ensnare me in its malice. I remembered the journal's final admonition, trust no one, and realized that someone had ransacked the chalet searching for the treasure my grandfather had hidden and recorded. Anger flared hot in my chest, but I fought it down, knowing rashness might cost me everything. Instead, I methodically photographed every detail, the smashed lantern, the overturned furniture, the muddy footprints that led away from the threshold into the gathering twilight, and noted the tread pattern, size 10, deep cleats I recognized from the local logging crews. With deliberate calm, I retrieved my grandfather's revolver from the hidden compartment in the hearth, its wood grip worn smooth, and slipped it into my belt. Then I searched the trap door. Its padlock had been pried loose, and scratches scored the iron ring where someone had tried to force it open. Realizing the police in Brasov would be days away and that the rural gendarmes in Gheorgheni would tread too lightly, I lit a small flare as a distress signal and climbed back to the ridge road, every shadow a potential threat. By starlight, I drove my battered Jeep to the ranger's cabin where Officer Christian Dragos waited, eyebrows drawn together in concern as I relayed the break-in. He promised reinforcements at first light, but warned me the isolation of these mountains bred its own code of silence. People here look after their own, he said quietly, and outsiders are often met with suspicion. Determined not to be driven off, by threats or superstition, I returned to the chalet under a moonlit sky and set to work fortifying the entry. I reinforced the trap door from below with a length of steel rod, rigged motion-sensitive lamps along the perimeter, and installed a small, solar-powered camera near the stone wolf marker. Yet the chill of that warning, Basil lives on, gnawed at me, reminding me that whatever had happened here decades ago, it still echoed through Basil's descendants. I knew then that I needed a guide intimately acquainted with these untamed slopes, someone who could navigate both the terrain and the local intricacies of loyalty and fear. At dawn's first light, I packed my gear and set out again, not alone, but with Andrei Pop, a forester whose weathered face and steady eyes spoke of a lifetime in these mountains. As we trod through frost-hung pines toward the ravine where the vein lay hidden, I felt a flicker of hope. With Andrei's knowledge, my grandfather's notes, and the will to protect a legacy built on sacrifice, I would confront the shadows both old and new and uncover the truth behind the betrayals that had stained these peaks. Andrei Pop arrived at the chalet just as the pale glow of dawn began to seep through the broken shutters, his heavy boots crunching frost into the porch planks. He was a man of few words, his lined face and silvered hair testament to decades patrolling these heights, yet his quiet presence filled me with a steadiness I sorely lacked. After I briefed him on the vandalism and handed him the taped pages of my grandfather's journal, Andrei nodded once and said, "We'll move the camp farther in, where no one can find us easily." Within the hour, we had erected a compact shelter of treated canvas beside a stand of ancient pines, situating ourselves above the ravine and out of sight from any casual passers-by. Under Andre's guidance, we reconnoitered the path to the crystalline vein, stepping carefully across moss-covered stones and sidestepping clusters of pale lichen that stained our boots. As we climbed, he told me in a low voice how Basil Kertész had once employed local woodsmen to fell trees for his own clandestine digs, promising them gold shares that never materialized. One by one, they stopped returning his calls, and rumors spread of a bitter argument at dusk by the creek, voices echoing off the canyon walls, then the recoil of a gunshot. Yet no body was ever found until my discovery in the hidden cellar. We reached the mineral seam by mid-morning, and I retrieved the sample pouch, carefully replacing the glowing rock chips with loose gravel to leave no obvious trace of our presence. But when we returned later that afternoon to gather more, we found the pouch torn open, the samples scattered as though someone had rifled through them in desperation. Nearby, footprints pressed into the loam, 4 distinct impressions, the front 2 angled outward as if their owner had lurched forward with unexpected haste. My heart sank as I realized the local forester's cleats could not match this tread. Andre frowned, examining the pattern. "This isn't Basil's old crew," he muttered. "It's fresh and made for sport, not work." That night, under a sky spangled with 100 bright stars, we heard the snap of a branch above our tent. I fumbled for my revolver, but the noise stopped before I could find the source. Sleep eluded us both, and at first light I resolved, if threats would not drive me from the vein, then knowledge would be my shield. I would trace those footprints, uncover the identity of my adversary, and finally piece together the tragic end of Basil Kertész and Adrian Novak, so that no one could ever again threaten what lay buried in these mountains. Under the pale morning light, Andre and I followed the rogue footprints along the creek bed, their strange tread pattern cutting a jagged line through the damp moss and clay, a silent invitation to danger. Each step echoed with history, the aged betrayals of Pavel and Basil, now mirrored by someone alive and desperate. We tracked those prints up a narrow ravine where the creek's murmur faded into the whisper of wind through ancient pines. There, half hidden beneath a low rock overhang, we discovered fresh clues. A discarded leather glove embossed with an unfamiliar monogram, and a crushed tin box lid dented exactly like the one I had retrieved from the chalet cellar. My pulse spiked as I realized our adversary had come looking for the notebook, hoping it would lead him to the vein. We pressed on, hearts pounding, until the ravine opened onto a small plateau crowned by an abandoned shepherd's hut. The hut's rotting door sagged on rusty hinges, and through its broken window I saw a flicker of candlelight and heard muffled voices. 2 figures hunched over piles of papers and rock samples on a battered wooden table. By reenacting the hush of cautious footsteps and using Andre's familiar forest code, we crept closer and recognized the taller figure by the ridge cap he wore. Victor Kertész, 3rd cousin once removed of the long-vanished Basil, his eyes gleaming with greed as he rifled through the torn pages of my grandfather's journal. I pressed a finger to my lips, signaling Andre to circle around for cover, and we watched as Victor's companion, a grizzled woodsman from a neighboring village, carelessly tipped earth from a sample pouch, revealing the mica-speckled chips I had packed only hours before. Something snapped inside me. With a low shout, I burst through the door, revolver drawn, and Andre followed, brandishing a length of rope to block any escape. Victor staggered back, eyes wide with shock, while his accomplice lunged for a rusted axe by the hearth. In the tense silence that followed, I leveled my gun at the lump of shadow and found my voice hoarse but steady. "Hands off the notebook. Leave now, or I will call the gendarmes." The woodsman hesitated, axe trembling in his grip, then slowly retreated into the dusk beyond the broken window. Victor, clutching the journal's taped pages, glared at me, voice low and dangerous. "This isn't over, Novak. You have no idea what you've unleashed." But I stood firm, each heartbeat a declaration. This land, my grandfather's legacy, would not be stolen again. As Victor fled into the gathering twilight, I recovered the missing pages and closed the shepherd's hut door with a decisive thud. In the stillness that followed, Andre and I exchanged a nod of grim triumph. We had confronted the living ghost of Basil's betrayal and survived. Yet as we made our way back to the chalet under a canopy of shimmering stars, I knew our journey was far from complete. Deeper truths lay hidden in that journal, and more dangerous enemies might await. But for the first time, I felt the full force of my grandfather's courage surging in my veins. I would protect his story, unearth the final secrets of Pavel and Basil, and ensure that their sacrifices would not be lost to time or avarice. Dawn's pale light found Andre and me poring over the recovered journal pages at the pine table, our breath fogging the oil lamp's glass as we pieced together the fractured narrative. Pavel Novak's entries, once torn and scattered, now lay in sequence before us. They revealed that the silver-green vein had first been noted on a storm-lashed night in 1971, when he and Basil Curtis had worked side by side discovering mineral veins that pulsed like hidden arteries beneath the mountain's flesh. But in a later passage, Pavel's handwriting grew jagged and desperate. He described how Basil had secretly diverted their tools to dig deeper than agreed, lured by visions of fortune and power. Pavel wrote of arguing under the stone wolf's watchful gaze, words hurled like ice shards, before Basil stormed off into the night. The final line, incomplete and smeared with rust, warned of the chamber beneath the hearth, and ended abruptly. I felt a chill as I realized the trap door in the chalet's hearth must conceal more than just a cellar, that there might be a deeper chamber, sealed and hidden, containing the truth of what drove Basil to betrayal and what ultimately caused their demise together. Resolved to uncover this hidden room, we packed our gear once more and lifted the floorboard near the hearth. Beneath the cellar's trap door, we found the reinforced beam Andre had installed, now bowed and splintered, as if pried by determined hands. With effort, we shifted it aside, revealing a narrower passage descending beyond the known cellar, an iron ladder riveted into the rock. As Andre shone his flashlight downward, the beam caught on metal, a heavy manhole cover engraved with the wolf emblem and Pavel's initials. My pulse hammered as I gripped the rusty handle and heaved it open. Below, damp stone walls glistened with mineral streaks, and carved alcoves lined the chamber like sentries. There, on a raised dais, lay an iron-bound chest wrapped in oilcloth. Hands trembling, I pried it open to reveal a stack of correspondence between Pavel and a third party. Letters in a stranger's hand, confirming Basil's threats to expose the vein's location to competing interests unless Pavel relinquished his share. Beneath the letters, a brass key and a small ledger detailed clandestine gold shipments moved through the nearby town, implicating Basil's descendants in a decades-long conspiracy. In that dim, secret vault, Andre and I finally understood the full scope of the betrayal. Basil had not only tried to steal the discovery, but had used the vein's promise to entangle innocent local workers, setting in motion a chain of violence that ended in murder. As we ascended back into the cellar, chest and evidence in hand, the morning sun flooded the chalet's windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like ghosts of the past. We knew the next step: present this proof to the authorities, safeguard the vein under official protection, and ensure that Pavel Novak's legacy remained untainted by greed. Yet even as hope stirred in my chest, I felt the weight of Basil's warning echo through the stone walls. Some secrets once unearthed demand a reckoning more profound than any man's ambition. At first light, I loaded the iron-bound chest and supporting evidence into my jeep, Andre riding shotgun with the revolver holstered at his side, and we descended the mist-shrouded mountain road toward Gheorgheni, where Officer Christian Dragos agreed to meet us in the municipal garage. As I lifted the chest onto a workbench, its oilcloth wrappings sliding away to reveal the stack of Basil's menacing letters, the brass key, and the ledger of clandestine gold shipments, Dragos listened in mounting disbelief before stepping back to radio for backup. Within hours, a squad of gendarmes, stern-faced and methodical, secured a warrant to search the abandoned shepherd's hut and Victor Kirtesh's rickety barn on the valley floor. I joined them at Victor's property, heart pounding as they forced open his reinforced door to find sacks of unexamined gold-bearing ore, stolen samples from the vein, and Basil's torn journal pages scattered across his work table. Victor himself was arrested in his shabby living room, glaring at me as two officers clamped cold steel cuffs around his wrists. His cousin's decades-long conspiracy unraveled in that moment, exposed by Pavel's own hand. Back at the gendarmerie station, I provided sworn testimony, the leather-bound chest's contents entered as evidence, and the local prosecutor immediately moved to classify the vein as a protected geological site under Romania's Ministry of Environment. With official protection in place, any unauthorized prospecting or mining carried penalties more severe than Victor and his accomplices could withstand. I watched as Dragos nodded respectfully, acknowledging that my grandfather's careful secrecy, once perceived as eccentric reclusiveness, had ultimately safeguarded the mountains from rampant exploitation. That afternoon, sitting in the prosecutor's office with the chest open on the oak table, I realized the time had come to choose the future of the discovery. Pavel's notes offered three paths: secure a private mining concession, sell the rights to a reputable firm under strict environmental guidelines, or preserve the vein indefinitely in situ as a scientific reserve. Remembering grandfather's final admonition, gold isn't everything. It is a curse in the hands of the greedy. I contacted the Ministry of Environment to propose the site's conversion into a protected research area, pledging to endow a Franklin Novak geological foundation that would fund annual field studies, cleanup efforts of historic mining scars, and educational scholarships for local youth. As I signed the Memorandum of Understanding, watching officials stamp each page, a profound sense of closure washed over me. I had not only avenged my grandfather's betrayal, but honored his intention to shield the mountains. Outside, Andre and Dragos exchanged a quiet salute, and I slipped the brass key into my pocket. A token not of vaults or riches, but of trust restored between past and present. 2 weeks after the official decree classifying the vein as a protected geological site, the Franklin Novak Geological Foundation organized its inaugural field expedition, transforming the once silent chalet and surrounding slopes into a bustling research outpost. I arrived before dawn to welcome a team of 5 environmental scientists from Bucharest University, along with 10 local volunteers, students from nearby villages, eager to contribute to cleanup operations and mineral surveys. We erected weatherproof tents around the chalet, now equipped with solar panels and a refurbished weather station salvaged from Pavel's original equipment. As the golden light of morning filtered through the spruce, I led a guided tour to the stone wolf marker, recounting my grandfather's careful observations and the story of his betrayal and redemption. Among the volunteers was my sister, Celeste, whose calm determination had always contrasted with her earlier favoritism. She carried a stack of freshly printed T-shirts bearing the Foundation's emblem, a stylized wolf's head entwined with crystalline veins. When she gently placed one on my shoulders, her eyes glistening, I felt the final walls between us crumble. Our parents arrived later that afternoon, hesitant at first, but their pride was unmistakable as they watched village children examine mica under hand lenses and scribble notes in field notebooks. My father, Elias, normally reserved, approached the scatter of researchers and placed a firm hand on my shoulder. "You've honored our family name in ways I never imagined," he said, voice thick with emotion. Mother, Marisol, dabbed at her tears with a lace handkerchief, a small smile of redemption on her lips. As the research team collected soil samples and restored old trails scarred by illicit digs, I stood on the chalet's restored porch alongside my family and Andre, watching the sun sink behind the Kalamani peaks. In that moment, I knew that Pavel Novak's legacy, once hidden in betrayal, buried in darkness, then rediscovered through courage, would now thrive as a beacon of scientific inquiry, environmental stewardship, and renewed family bonds. In the weeks that followed our first successful expedition, the Franklin Novak Geological Foundation shifted from cleanup and research to education and outreach, igniting a spark of scientific curiosity across Transylvania. I coordinated with local schools in Brasov and Gheorgheni to develop a series of weekend workshops, each focused on hands-on geology. Volunteer instructors guided teenage students in rock identification, basic field surveying techniques, and the importance of preserving natural heritage. One crisp Saturday morning, I joined a group of 20 high schoolers at the old quarry outside Voila, where we demonstrated core sampling using a miniature drill rig I had arranged through university contacts. The children's eyes widened as they examined uncut veins of quartz and mica glimmering under the sun, and I realized that the legacy of one solitary cabin had blossomed into a movement, young minds enthralled by the promise of discovery, eager to follow in Pavel Novak's footsteps, yet with an ethos of stewardship rather than extraction. Meanwhile, Celeste spearheaded the Foundation's scholarship program, awarding annual grants to 2 deserving students pursuing degrees in earth sciences. The application process itself became a learning experience. Candidates submitted personal essays describing a natural site they held dear and outlined proposals for protecting or studying it. Reading their heartfelt narratives, from a dry riverbed near Savata to a limestone cavern in Prade, reminded me how many hidden treasures lay scattered across our country, bound by personal histories and waiting for preservation. Our parents, now active board members, helped raise funds through community galas held in the refurbished CHALET, its grand hall echoing once more with music and laughter instead of silence and dust. Each event celebrated not only scientific achievement, but the power of forgiveness and the reconnection of a family once fractured by bitterness. As I stood beneath the vaulted rafters, now restored to their original pine glory, listening to my mother's gentle piano playing and my father's warm toasts, I understood that the true vein we had uncovered ran deeper than gold. It was the vein of shared purpose and renewed trust, coursing through every heart gathered under that ancient roof. With the foundation now firmly established, Celeste and I turned our attention outward, forging partnerships beyond Romania's borders to ensure the Franklin Novak Geological Foundation would leave a lasting impact on international conservation efforts. In early spring, we hosted a delegation of geoscientists from the University of Vienna and a team from the European Federation of Protected Areas for a 3-day symposium at the CHALET, transformed into a hub of cross-cultural exchange. Under vaulted pine rafters, experts presented on topics ranging from sustainable mining practices to community-led conservation models, while Celeste coordinated simultaneous workshops for local youth in digital mapping and drone-assisted terrain analysis. I guided one field session up the ravine where Pavel and Basil first uncovered the vein, demonstrating how modern LiDAR scanning could document geological formations without intrusive digging. As the Austrian professor Dr. Langmüller adjusted his geologist's hammer on a sample outcrop, he turned to me with admiration. "Your grandfather's vision lives on not only here, but in the spirit of collaboration you've awakened." Outside, my parents mingled with visiting dignitaries, proudly recounting the chalet's transformation, from an abandoned relic to an emblem of scientific and familial renewal, while Victor Kertész's conviction had become a cautionary tale of greed's ruin. In the evenings, candlelit discussions spilled onto the veranda, where Andrei shared local lore of the Carpathians, and students recited their plans for community-based projects. Each smile, each handshake, reaffirmed that the legacy Pavel Novak had entrusted to me had grown into something far greater than a protected vein of minerals. It had become a living testament to reconciliation, knowledge, and the power of one family's courage to inspire an entire region. By midsummer, The Franklin Novak Geological Foundation had outgrown the chalet's cozy confines, and we broke ground on a new research center perched on the hill above Brasov, its glass facade reflecting the rolling hills below. I oversaw the engineering plans, steel beams anchored into bedrock, geothermal heating drawn from deep aquifers, and a green roof planted with native alpine flora. Celeste organized the inaugural volunteer staff, recruiting local educators, lab technicians, and youth ambassadors to run daily programming. On opening day, hundreds gathered to tour the polished laboratories where seismic monitors hummed softly and 3D printers were busy replicating mineral specimens. As I delivered the keynote speech, I looked out over families and children clutching their field notebooks, ambassadors from Austria chatting with summer interns from South Africa, and my parents standing proudly to the side, my father's stern, countenance softened into genuine pride, my mother's eyes glistening with tears of joy. In that moment, I realized that this center was more than a building. It was the culmination of a journey that began with a crumbling cabin, 2 skeletons, and a torn notebook. It symbolized not just the scientific pursuit of understanding the Earth's hidden veins, but the healing of a family's fractures and the forging of a global community bound by stewardship and wonder. As autumn painted the Carpathians in amber and crimson, the Foundation launched its first international field school, attracting graduate students and scholars from 5 continents to study the Kalamani Ridge's unique geology. I led a course on ethical field practices, demonstrating how to conduct core sampling without disturbing delicate ecosystems, while Celeste taught workshops in community engagement, showing how to transform local heritage into sustainable tourism that benefited villagers rather than exploited them. Our parents returned to the chalet to host a gala under the starlit rafters, attended by UNESCO representatives who praised our initiative as a model for responsible geopark development. When the UNESCO plaque was unveiled beside the stone wolf marker, proclaiming the site a global geopark in honor of Pavel Novak's vision, I felt a surge of gratitude and humility. A simple, orphaned legacy had blossomed into an international beacon. Visitors from across Europe hiked the marked trails, guided by foundation maps and smartphone apps we developed, each stepping lightly in reverence for the land and the story it held. In the glow of the ceremony's lanterns, my sister and I exchanged a knowing look, recognizing that our shared effort had not only honored our grandfather's sacrifice, but had united disparate peoples under a common purpose: to protect, to learn, and to remember. Now, standing once more on the chalet's restored porch as winter's first snow dusted the pine needles, I reflect on a journey that transformed me from a sidelined son into a guardian of mountains. The firelight dances across the polished journals lining the library shelves, each volume filled with new research, carefully bound copies of Grandfather Pavel's original notebook, and letters from students whose lives were forever changed by our work. Celeste tends to her seedlings in the botanical wing, preparing her next lecture on environmental psychology, while our parents share a cup of tea by the hearth, no longer strangers to my ambitions, but partners in this grand endeavor. The brass key I carry in my pocket is no longer a mere keepsake. It symbolizes the trust bridging past and future, reminding me that true wealth lies not in unmined ore, but in the shared commitment to protect our planet and each other. As the wind whistles through mountainous corridors beyond the window, I hear Pavel's voice echo softly in my mind. You have done more than I could have dreamed. And in that quiet, snow-kissed moment, I know his legacy, our legacy, will endure, flowing through river and valley, inspiring generations yet to come.